Reading the opponent and the format. Reading the opponent and the format. On 26 September 1960, in a CBS studio in Chicago, two candidates for the presidency of the United States walked onto a small set for the first nationally televised presidential debate in American history. The candidates were Vice President Richard Nixon and Senator John F. Kennedy. The audience was approximately 70 million Americans, the largest audience yet assembled for any single political broadcast. Nixon had prepared the way a man trained in the formal debate tradition prepares. He had done his policy reading. He had memorized positions. He had drilled his lines. He arrived at the studio thinking about the substance of what he would say. He was, by any reasonable assessment, the more experienced and more substantively prepared of the two men. Kennedy had prepared differently. He had done the policy work, but he had also studied the medium. He had visited the studio in advance. He had checked the lighting. He had selected a suit color that would not blend into the gray background. He had requested adjustments to the stage. He had, in the days before the debate, spent time in the Florida sun. His skin was tanned and even. His weight was at the upper end of what looked athletic on television. He arrived at the studio thinking about how he would appear. Nixon arrived having recently been hospitalized. He had lost weight. His shirt collar, which had fit him a month earlier, gaped at the neck. He had refused makeup, partly out of confidence that he did not need it, partly out of a worry that wearing it would seem effeminate to certain segments of his base. The stage lights were merciless. Under them, Nixon looked tired, sickly, and uncertain. The gray suit blended with the gray background. Nixon appeared to dissolve into the set. Sweat ran down his face. He wiped it. The cameras caught him wiping it. The substance of the debate was an even contest, perhaps tilted slightly to Nixon. The two men had similar policy positions on most of the questions. Where they differed, Nixon had the more detailed command of the material. Listeners on radio that night, polling afterwards, gave Nixon a clear win. Watchers on television gave Kennedy a clear win. Kennedy went on to win the election by approximately 112,000 votes, fewer than 0.5%. The most studied conclusion from the 1960 debate is that Nixon read the substance of the contest correctly and the format of the contest incorrectly. Kennedy read both. The format read decided the election. This chapter is about the dual read. Before deploying any of the moves we have built up in parts II and III, the practitioner reads two things, the opponent and the format. The same content is a different argument in different formats. The same opponent admits of different attacks depending on what kind of arga they are. The dual read proceeds. Selection, failing to make it, produces a defense that is technically correct and rhetorically misplaced. Nixon under the studio lights. The first read is the opponent. What kind of arga are you facing? A trained debater will fight differently from a public intellectual, will fight differently from a lawyer, will fight differently from an academic specialist, will fight differently from a hostile journalist, will fight differently from a politician on a stage. Each has different training, different reflexes, different costly signals, different tells. The moves available to you against a trained debater, retorsio, reductio, performative contradiction, may be the wrong moves against a hostile journalist, who will bypass your moves by framing rather than by arguing. Read for 5 things. Training. What tradition has the opponent been trained in? Lawyers are trained in adversarial procedure with formal rules of evidence. They argue narrowly within stipulated frames. Academics are trained in peer review with formal citation and rebuttal. They argue from authority of literature. Public intellectuals are trained in the production of clean prose for general audiences. They argue from striking phrases and analogical compression. Politicians are trained in audience management. They argue from the median voter and the news cycle. Each training produces strengths in some moves and weaknesses in others. Habits. What does the opponent do first when challenged? What is their default posture? Some opponents under pressure deflect to authority, the studies show. Others deflect to credentials. I have spent 30 years studying this. Others escalate emotionally. Others retreat to definitions. Others go to ridicule. The first move habit is observable from any 30 seconds of recent footage. It tells you what the opponent will do at the moment of greatest pressure, when their reflexes take over from their preparation. Costly signals. What credibility does the opponent carry into the room? An opponent with relevant lived experience signals one kind of authority. An opponent with relevant credentials signals another. An opponent with a public record of having been right about hard questions signals a third. Each of these signal types has corresponding vulnerabilities. The opponent whose authority rests on lived experience is vulnerable to substantive technical challenge. The opponent whose authority rests on credentials is vulnerable to challenge from someone with stronger credentials. The opponent whose authority rests on track record is vulnerable to challenge on the cases where they were wrong. Tells. What does the opponent do involuntarily when their position is in trouble? Tone changes, speech speeds up, eye contact breaks, a particular phrase recurs as I said. The point is, be that as it may, shoulders rise. The tells are observable in long-form video. They tell you in real time during the debate when your moves are landing and when they are not. What they will not concede. Every opponent has a position they will not abandon, even at significant cost. This is sometimes the central thesis they came to defend, sometimes a peripheral commitment they have publicly bound themselves to, sometimes a position that, if conceded, would damage other commitments in their network of beliefs. The non-conceded points are visible in the opponent's prior public record. They tell you where the opponent is committed past the point of evidence, and where, accordingly, you should not waste moves trying to extract the concession that will not come. The 5 reads can be done in advance. They require studying the opponent's prior performances at length, not in fragments. An hour of footage with notes will produce a usable opponent profile. 3 hours of footage will produce a strong one. The second read is the format. What kind of game are you in? The same content is a different argument depending on the duration of the engagement, the composition of the audience, the mechanism by which a winner is decided, the moves the format permits, and the relationship between the live event and any subsequent text or recording. Read for 5 things here as well. Duration. How long is the engagement? A 2-minute exchange in a media interview admits of different moves than a 6-hour panel discussion, than a multi-day debate, than the multi-year correspondence of a public intellectual feud. Short formats privilege punchy phrases, costly signals, and reframing. Long formats privilege technical argument, sustained pervipaksha, and the gradual accumulation of credibility. Selecting moves appropriate to the duration is a precondition of effectiveness. Audience composition. Who is in the room? Who is watching? We have seen the 3 audiences, the opponent, the room, and the absent third audience following through the medium. Each format has a different composition of the 3. A formal academic debate has a small live audience and a larger written record audience. A media interview has a small in-studio audience and a vast viewing audience. A political stump speech has an in-person audience and a clip audience that will see only the segment that goes viral. The composition determines what moves will register. Judging mechanism. How is the winner decided? Formal debates have judges and scoring rubrics. Media interviews have polls and headlines. Political debates have post-event analysis and shifts in voting intention. Academic debates have peer reviews and subsequent citation. The judging mechanism determines what counts as a successful move. A move that wins on a formal scoring rubric may lose on a viral clip. A move that wins on a viral clip may lose on a peer review. Allowable moves. What does the format permit? Some formats permit interruption, others penalize it. Some formats permit appeal to outside evidence, others restrict to material introduced in the engagement. Some formats permit cross-examination, others permit only set-piece statements. The moves we have built up in parts II and III are a complete inventory. What is in use in any given format depends on the format's rules. Live-to-record relationship. Is the engagement a one-off, or will the record persist? A trial transcript persists. A live debate persists in the recording. An academic feud persists in the published exchanges. A media interview clip persists for as long as the platform that hosts it. Persistence of the record changes the calculation. What looked like a lost moment in the live engagement may be the moment that carries forward to the audience that matters. Lincoln's loss to Douglas in 1858, in the formal sense of the Senate seat, was reversed in 1860 by the persistence of the printed debates as part of his presidential candidacy's evidence. Format reading is partly research and partly real-time observation. The format's formal rules can be studied in advance. The format's actual operation often requires watching prior instances of the same format with the same kind of opponent and the same kind of audience. The duel. Read opponent and format is the work that comes before any mover selection. Shankara was, by a wide margin, the most format-conscious arga in the classical Indian tradition. He fought differently against Mimamsa scholars, against Buddhists, against Kapalikas, against village householders, against royal courts, against students. He selected debate venues and terms with precision. He negotiated formats when he could. He accepted formats he had not designed when he could not negotiate them, but the acceptance was always informed by a clear read of what the format permitted and what it did not. The Mandana debate in Mahishi was held under a specific set of terms that Shankara accepted. The Garland test as visible win condition, Abhay Bharati as umpire, an extended duration with rest periods, full Sanskrit technical vocabulary, a specific stake, renunciation by the loser. These terms favored an opponent of Mandana's training, textual mastery, household standing, regional reputation. They also permitted the moves Shankara was best at: sequential commitment extraction, sustained inferential refutation, strategic concession at length. The format was negotiated. Both parties had reason to accept it. The road encounter with the Chandala, the subject of Fight Breakdown 3, had no terms at all. It was an ordinary social interaction, in which an outcast man crossed Shankara's path on a road in Varanasi. Shankara's response, "Get out of the way," was a move appropriate to the format he initially perceived, a senior Brahmin asking an outcast to step aside. The Chandala's response, 5 Sanskrit verses pointing out that Shankara's request presupposed a metaphysics his own teaching denied, reframed the format on the spot. The encounter became a debate. The venue was a road. The audience was Shankara's own disciples and whatever bystanders happened to be passing. Shankara recognized the format shift instantly. He prostrated. The Manisha Panchakam was the result. The lesson, for our purposes here, when the format shifts on you mid-encounter, the first task is to recognize the shift. The second task is to fight in the new format, not the old one. The encounter at Govinda's cave, the subject of the prologue and Fight Breakdown 1, had a single question format. Shankara's response was a single paragraph composition, the Nirvana Shatkam, designed for that specific format. The format permitted no extended argument. It permitted only the kind of compressed, identity-establishing statement that a single question could elicit. Shankara's preparation matched the format precisely. The pattern across the major encounters is consistent. Shankara reads the opponent. He reads the format. He selects the moves that are available, given both. He fights in the format he is in, not in the format he might have preferred. The contemporary parallel that has, more than perhaps any other, demonstrated the principle on a global stage was Muhammad Ali against George Foreman. On 30 October 1974, in the city of Kinshasa in what was then Zaire, the fight known to the world as the Rumble in the Jungle. Foreman was the champion. Foreman was 25 years old, undefeated, and enormously powerful. He had taken the title from Joe Frazier the previous year, knocking Frazier down 6 times in 2 rounds. The conventional wisdom in 1974 was that Ali, at 32, with a banned period from boxing in the years that followed his refusal of the Vietnam draft, was no longer the fighter he had been. Foreman was favored heavily in essentially every published prediction. Ali read the format. The fight would be in Zaire in October, after the rainy season but in tropical heat. Foreman trained for power. Foreman was not a fighter who had ever needed to go many rounds. The Zaire heat would tax Foreman's stamina in a way the climate of his American training camps had not. The fight would not be quickly settled by Foreman's first 3 rounds of explosive aggression. It would extend into the middle and late rounds, where stamina would tell. Ali also read the opponent. Foreman, when his initial onslaught did not produce a knockout, had no second mode. Foreman had not been forced to find a second mode. He had won every previous fight in the first mode. The first mode was concussive forward pressure with looping power shots. If the first mode could be absorbed without catastrophic damage, the second mode would not arrive in time, because Foreman would be exhausted before he could develop one. Ali built the rope-a-dope strategy on the dual read. He went to the ropes early. He absorbed Foreman's punches on his arms, his sides, his shoulders, anywhere but the chin and the temple. He let Foreman exhaust himself. He talked to Foreman during the fight. "Is that all you got, George?" Foreman, by the 4th round, was visibly tired. By the 7th, he was punching with diminished force. In the 8th round, with Foreman exhausted, Ali came off the ropes and knocked Foreman out. The fight is one of the most studied in the history of boxing because the strategy was visible, articulable, and depended on a precise read of the opponent and the format. Ali's dual read was the entire foundation of the strategy. Without it, the rope-a-dope was suicidal. With it, the rope-a-dope was inevitable. The principle transfers without modification to verbal combat. Read the opponent, what their training is, what their habits are, what they cannot recover from. Read the format, what the duration is, what the audience is, what the format permits. Select the strategy on the dual read. The selection of moves in the moment of attack and defense is the small game. The dual read is the larger game inside which the smaller games are played. A note on what reading is not. Reading the opponent is not psychological warfare in the sense of attempting to destabilize them. The read is for you. It informs your own move selection. The opponent does not need to know you have read them, and revealing the read prematurely usually weakens it. Reading the format is not legalistic exploitation of rules. The read is to deploy your strongest moves where they are most effective. It is not to find loopholes in the format that allow you to circumvent honest engagement. The format read is a serious matter, not a clever one. When you see what looks like dual reading deployed as gamesmanship, taunts, exploitation of timing, manipulative framing of rules, you are looking at a different practice. The dual read in our tradition is preparation for honest engagement under conditions where the engagement is more effective for being prepared. The point is to win the right way, not to win by finding the loopholes.